best environment for M&A transaction tends to be attractive financing conditions, good equity market valuations, stability, plus then actually probably a growth environment or strategic environment where M&A makes sense.
Now, in the first half of the year, the top deals included Roche, for example, Novartis, Partners Group, Givaudan. They all acquired company. Don't forget Adecco Group as well. Mainly in the healthcare and pharmaceutical sector, right? Energy companies as well. What do you expect in terms of pipeline in the second half?
We expect a relatively broad pipeline. I wouldn't tie it to any particular sector. Yes, we have seen the pharma industry being more active in the first half, but equally I will probably expect a bit of consolidation in the second half as a result. So, I think it will be sector agnostic because a number of sectors here in Switzerland are in very good shape, but are seeing structurally slightly lower growth. So M&A makes sense as a supplement of organic growth.
Let's talk about the deal size as well. The 12 top transactions were above $1 billion. Do you expect similar sizes going into the second half?
Yes, is the short answer. We expect to see a number of what we call mid-sized transactions, so the billion-plus transaction, but we also expect a good level of activity on the smaller side, where we've seen a string of transactions in the mid-market, where actually the environment has continued to be very healthy.
And how do investors react now and position themselves given the potential coming from the mid-sized companies?
It's a very interesting segment for investors because they see it as a technology-leading, often family-owned, family-founded companies. So it's an interesting sector, both for strategics, international strategics who want to invest in Switzerland and get hold of this technology leadership, as well as private equity who obviously are always very interested in getting their hands on these companies.
Talking about family businesses, do you think there is any potential seller here in Switzerland at this point? Or do they remain very traditional and don't want to sell?
There's always sellers, but this is a very long process. Don't forget, these are companies that have been in family hands for many, many years, decades, generations. So it's not an easy decision. We're very respectful of those decisions and the process that these decisions require. So typically, these companies come onto the market when the owner wants them to come onto the market.
Let's talk about the global picture as well, Jens. And data by Dealogic, for example, showed that global M&A activity rose to about $2.8 trillion in the second half of the year. This is a jump of like 52% compared to the same period last year. Do you see this trend continue?
You have to look behind the data a little bit. It is very sector specific. There's been a lot of TMT. There's been a lot of tech M&A in generally. So I don't think the statement is necessarily true for all industries. But we certainly have seen a heightened level of activity in M&A because the fundamentals continue to be robust.
And in which countries do you see the biggest activity? US, China, or other kind of smaller economies as well?
US has been very active, but we've also seen a lot of cross-border M&A activity. We've seen M&A activity in Asia, probably less so China, where there's a phase of consolidation. But the activity has been good across the board.
And for Swiss companies, which are the best markets to look at this point in time? Where are the biggest opportunities for them?
I think it depends. Ultimately, Asia is very interesting. You have a rising consumer and middle class with growing affluence. There's very interesting structural growth. But also the US is interesting, given that it's a very strongly growing economy now.
Let's talk about equity markets as well here. And of course, IPOs is the big magic word here. Now, we had Romeo Lacher from SIX earlier this year saying that we might see between 4 to 6 IPOs here in Switzerland this year. We're already almost approaching August now, and we have seen a lot of activity already. What is your forecast for the whole year of 2018?
We continue to expect to see probably between 2 and 3 IPOs or listings for the remainder of the year. Always hard to predict because don't forget the decision is with the issuer. It's not with the bankers, advisors or with the stock exchange. But certainly the environment remains conducive for IPOs.
But not all IPOs went very well in Switzerland this year. For example, H&A Group as well had to crawl back again. What were some of the issues? What are some of the problems for the companies?
I don't want to comment on any transaction specifically, but I think in generally there has been a lot of supply coming into the IPO markets, a lot more than we have seen in 2017. And investors had choice, investors could be selective, and we have seen investors being selective as a result.
So what is the benchmark? What is a good, size and number for IPOs? Why could the market not absorb all of them?
I don't think it's a capacity issue. I think it's an issue of quality, it's an issue of choice, it's an issue of mix. But look, generally we feel any offering in excess of between 150 plus million is a good size offering.
And of course, there's so many different ways and opportunities for companies to raise capital at this point in time. Fixed income as well, other areas in the financial industry. Which do you think that is the biggest option and the best opportunity for the companies to raise funding?
Again, it depends on the specifics. We're seeing a big shift from the banking market to the capital markets in general, also in Switzerland. So I think certainly capital markets have become more attractive. There's a much broader offering now available to potential issuers. But as a way of raising equity, the IPO market is interesting, but there's also a big market in private equity. There's a big market in pre-IPO financings. So I think the offering is very broad, and it really depends on the specific needs of an issuer.
It's a very interesting situation because the situation is so different in the United States, isn't it? Where the market functions very differently to Switzerland.
I'm not sure that's true. I think Switzerland, like the rest of Europe, is maybe a few years behind the United States, but we're certainly seeing very similar trends.
And do you see a big catch-up of Switzerland when it comes to
a progressive catch-up, as I said, the move towards capital market, the move also towards private equity and other asset classes. But this will play out over the coming years. When
we spoke earlier, a couple of days ago, you mentioned that biotech and medtech are very important and lucrative sectors for IPOs. Do you still maintain this point and this position? And why are medtech and biotech companies in Switzerland going public?
Switzerland is a world-leading place for medtech, healthcare, biotech in general. There's a lot of companies that have been founded here that have been very successful. Some of them have IPO'd in the US, some of them have IPO'd in Switzerland, some have actually come back to Switzerland. And they need capital to grow, and it's a very attractive capital market to raise funding for growth.
What kind of international investor appetite do you see for these Swiss champions and Swiss best-in-class companies?
We see very significant appetite. Generally, investors like to invest in Swiss companies. They like the technology leadership, as I mentioned before. They like the long-term orientation of these companies. They like the niche leadership of these companies. So we continue to see very significant demand for these companies, both in the primary but also in the secondary markets.
Foreign exchange is always a big topic when it comes to that as well. How do you see the situation with the Swiss franc develop?
Look, it's been a blessing in disguise in the sense that the franc shock has made the Swiss industry even more competitive because it had to. Obviously, any positive interest movement between the Swiss franc and the dollar, Swiss franc and the euro or other key currencies will be helpful for the Swiss economy.